So in my last video, I mentioned a guy called @UUCow on Twitter who is sort of a major player in the Sakuga community in the English-speaking world. He is a major contributor, if not the guy who runs the Sakuga blog, big part of Sakuga Boru, writes articles for Anime News Network and stuff, but I've been following his Twitter for most of the year, and he posts lots of, like, webms and gifs and like images of cool moments or cool scenes from anime that he's watching. And what's fascinated and at times even aggravated me is how he will post all these scenes just because like they're cool Sakuga scenes, like they have cool movement or something, you know, a character is moving in a way that he finds interesting and he posts it, but it doesn't matter like what show it is or what the context of the scene is. There was a time where he was posting like scene after scene from the Asterisk War, and I'm looking at it like, yeah, that's fine and all, but it's the fucking Asterisk War. Like, why are you sharing this? I don't want to see this. But I think it's because there's a very different sort of approach that he takes than what I typically take, which is that he is about appreciating things and I'm more about critiquing things. And I sort of bleed the lines on these, and I'm sure he's done both as well, but it really became interesting this current season where he's been posting all these scenes from the show Occultic 9, and like every once in a while he'll like mention, you know, Occultic 9 is still not a good show, but look at how great this animation is, or wow, I can't believe they brought on this guy, and like, you know, there's this excitement over who's working on it, even though he is admitting that the show is not very good. And I totally get that, because I find intrigue in lots of shows that aren't necessarily good because of how they contribute to this greater, you know, cultural idea of either what's going on in anime or who's the people working on it. So for instance, I just did this 2-part video series called Akiyuki Shinbo in the 90s, and I talk about each of these shows, and most of them I'm like, here's all the stuff Shinbo did on this show. By the way, I don't recommend it. It's not very good. And some of the response to the video was like, so the message I'm getting is, these shows aren't worth watching. Why'd you even talk about them, you know? And it's because there's a huge difference to me between I find it interesting and I love it as a show, you know? But I think there's sort of a conflict between the people who are coming from these two different schools of thought. I think there's a lot of people who see talking about anime as trying to find the good stuff and trying to like justify your interest in this medium or to explain to people why some things are great, and like, you know, talking about a bad show is just kind of antithetical to what you're all about. It's like, why even bother, you know? Whereas I think there's this other school who kind of hates the criticism and like the critiquing because of the fact that they're like, you know, there's so much to be interested in even in these bad shows, and we're just glossing over it. Like, I'm sure there's some people who are upset that I, you know, rag on the Asterisk War and on A1 Pictures so heavily when there's all these animators and directors who are interesting working for A1 Pictures, and those people are like, you know, they're upset that I would go on this long tirade about them. But for me, like, I'm all about trying to join these two things. Like, I want to see people being able to both appreciate and critique something, to say like, you know, yeah, it has great animation cuts, but here's also the problem with it and stuff. And I'm also bothered by the Sakuga community in general for the fact, and I'm sure I've mentioned this elsewhere, and I've got a video coming out in like a couple of days that like really goes in about this, how like, it bothers me that everyone just celebrates the fact that things are moving. And, like, I feel like there's not enough critique of whether or not the movement is actually interesting, or, like, how it is in context, whether it's being used well, you know? Having a scene in the Asterisk War where lots of stuff is moving it can't be impressive because it's in the fucking Asterisk War, you know? Like, the context is so terrible that, like, it infects the animation itself. And I also don't think that any of the animation in there is particularly noteworthy. You know, even the fight scenes, they're not directed well, they're not storyboarded well, they're just animated a lot, you know? And to me, like, what makes, like, Yutaka Nakamura special is not the fact that he animates things, you know, very movement heavy. Like, it's not about how well he animates. It's about the fact that the fights he animates look amazing and are very well staged and choreographed. And, you know, that final fight from Sword of the Stranger, what makes it special is the location it takes place in, the styles of fighting that the two characters use, you know, the different attacks they use, the way that their emotions and their personalities are conveyed in their facial expressions and in the style of movement. You know, that's why it's such a great scene, not just because things are moving. And, you know, when you watch a scene from the Asterisk War where two characters, yeah, sure, they're moving around a lot, but who are they? Who cares? You know, what does their movement say about them? Nothing. But again, that's the difference. And I wish that we could have both without anybody getting mad over it. You know, I've seen some people who are like really upset that someone would say like there's nothing good about the Asterisk War or something. And I've seen vice versa, people who'd be really upset that people would even pay a second thought to the Asterisk War just because of what animators are working on it. When it's like, why aren't we talking about this other show that's actually good, you know, regardless of its animation? And I mean, everyone has their interests, and everyone is just gonna follow what they're currently interested in, you know. And I'm not gonna like fucking put Yu Yu Cow on blast or anything for the fact that he is watching the Asterisk War and not whatever show I want him to watch. His interest is in animation, and he's following these animators, you know. That's what it's about for him, and that's what he wants to cover. And what I want to cover is, you know, the shows that I think are worth talking about, which are always extremely personal. And, you know, I've never really been one to follow any kind of trend in what I talk about. And so, you know, I don't blame him, and I doubt he blames me for the stuff we talk about, but I see people who are mad about it. I see people who are, like, having difficulty reconciling these two schools of thought, and I wish that we could all kind of come together about it and, like, you know, and have it both ways, and have people understand, like, yeah, I talked about Shinbo and talked about all these shitty shows because I'm interested in Shinbo himself, and maybe this video isn't for everybody, you know, but for the people who care about it, it's great. But it's interesting for me as someone writing in both styles to, you know, to have an audience who half of them might not care about the other thing. You know, like when I first started covering anime, I was doing Useless Anime Knowledge, which was a series of videos that are like more about the technical side of stuff. They're more about like who was the staff, where did this show come from, and there's a lot of people who just don't care about that shit, you know, who just want to hear why is the show good. And then when I do make a video about why is the show good, there's other people who are like, that's just your opinion. Nobody cares about your opinion. I want to know about facts, you know. It's a hard line to walk when I'm interested in both sides, but yeah, well, I guess there's not much else to say about that without repeating myself over and over again.